Ready to go.
Wonderful. All right. Welcome everyone to our first online presentation, obviously hosted by MABA, Moths and Butterflies of Australia. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Axel Callis. I'm based in Melbourne. I'm actually a medical researcher, but moths and butterflies are my passion. And I'm currently the president of MABA Society. And yeah, I'm in a very fortunate position to welcome you all to this first meeting. As you may or may not know, the idea is to have these Zoom presentations perhaps two, three, four times a year. So this is the first one. It's a Kickstarter for our presentation series, and we will see how things go. And we'll definitely try to organize an interesting program for this year and for the next year. And in the longer run, also invite our members to actually submit ideas for presentations. So if they have anything that they want to present themselves, they can obviously get in contact and propose a presentation for this type of meeting. Um, all right, so I guess we will start very soon. Before we do that, I wanted to thank Michael Braby, who's obviously here and is the secretary of the organization. He's been obviously fantastic in getting all of this going and organizing MABA, having it running as a society now a couple of years after having started. And he's also responsible for having organized this first meeting. So thank you, Michael, for doing all of that. And now let's get to the core of our business here. So today we are lucky to have Kai from Sydney, from the Sydney Museum, here presenting to us. Kai is an ichthyologist. I'm not entirely sure if I pronounce it even correctly, but one could also say he's a fish person. So he's a career scientist who's actually working on the taxonomy of reef fish and is spending a lot of time in the collection looking at fish taxonomy, but also spending a little bit of time out in the reef and the open ocean collecting new samples. In addition to his job as a fish expert, fortunately for this society, he's also a Lepidoptera specialist, specifically interested in butterflies, and he's spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia and Melanesia looking at butterflies and recording their ecology and distribution. And during this work, he has developed a great eye and a great feel for the camera and has actually come up with a huge number of beautiful photographs. A lot of them are displayed on our website and I'm sure can be found in his publications. And he will give us a presentation today about his work on butterflies and specifically on the ins and outs of Lepidopteran photography. So Kai, I hand over to you and please introduce yourself and maybe give a little bit more background than I could do. Thank you.
Thank you, Axel. All right, I'll start by sharing my screen and then I'll go from there. Um, all right, I think that should be good. Is it good? I get a thumbs up yeah? Okay, awesome. Good evening. Thanks for having me, Axel and Michael. So I wanted to preface this by saying that today's talk really is quite informal. It's just meant to be a showcase on butterfly photography and what I think, you could look out for in the field when you're out searching for these critters, how to compose your images and what to do with your camera, things like that. And as Axel has said, most people know me as a fish biologist. I am the fish curator at the Australian Museum. Most of my research is on coral reef fish taxonomy, which means that I spend a fair bit of my time when I'm not in the office out on boats, which is not somewhere where you would think of as having a lot of butterflies. Although I should say that I have seen my fair share of butterflies out in the open ocean. This is a photo of a meadow argus out in the waters around Norfolk Island, clinging onto the glass panel outside of our boat. But when I'm not on boats is when I'm out looking for butterflies. I've been photographing butterflies now for close to 15 years. I started when I was in high school. Before living in Australia, I grew up in Singapore. So being near the equator and in the tropics, there were lots of butterflies. So it was something that I was just really interested in since I was, quite a young boy. And over the years, as my interests have grown, I have traveled to many exotic places, mostly across the Malay archipelago, and also Wallacea, where I have photographed an enormous amount of butterflies. And in the last 10 years that I've lived in Australia, this has brought many new opportunities and challenges in the pursuit of my butterfly photography passion. So while I want to, kind of preface that today's talk is really broad in general, just on butterflies in general, I have tried to keep it somewhat Australian focused for the most part. So please bear with me on that. Now, like any hobby, which involves a photographic component, butterfly photography is quite a huge spectrum in a sense that people tend to use anything from between hobby cameras, phone cameras, to professional DSLR cameras with telephoto lenses. You can see from this photo, I'm kind of really in the middle with an entry-level DSLR, and it appears that I don't really have much regard for the state of my equipment, because I am lying my entire body in a puddle of, or in a riverbank, trying to photograph butterflies on the bank. And really, for me, a camera is a means to an end. So, in saying that, what's the deal with your camera gear? Well, really, there is no deal. Um, I met this kid, his name is Maf, in one of my travels to Sulawesi in Indonesia, where he photographs butterflies using only his phone, and he puts everything up on iNaturalist. And to date, he's photographed over 500 species of butterflies in Sulawesi using only his phone. Many of them he's Many of them that has been photographed have never been seen alive or photographed alive before that. Um, and you can see in this photo here, he's standing on top of a motorcycle trying to photograph a little light-scented butterfly. And the photos turn out really well. So really, there is no rules to what you use when it comes to taking photos of your butterflies. That said, however, I feel like most people today use some sort of mid-level or entry-level photography equipment that allows you some sort of option for manual control. Now, I really don't want to get too much into camera because I don't want this talk to be on equipment. There are a lot of information that you can find out there and online, but I will just be skimming through this bit and touching a little bit and doing my due diligence on how these different camera functions affect and ultimately result in the photos that you want to take of what you're looking for in the field. So when we think of photography using any SLR camera or any introductory camera model, we like to think of it as the exposure triangle, which is comprising ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Now, the ISO represents the camera's sensors sensitivity to light, and at a lower ISO, um, there is less amount of light reaching the sensor. But the trade-off is that it produces a cleaner, higher quality image. In contrast, a higher level ISO, for example, up to 3000 or even more, boosts the camera's sensitivity to light in dim conditions, but at the cost of introducing grain or noise. So this is really good for photographing species that are, preferably found in deeply shaded environments, or where, if it's an overcast day and you're finding that you're struggling with light, bumping up the ISO is always pretty good. Um, Aperture, on the other hand, is the adjustable opening to a camera lens, which then allows the amount of light to come in to reach the sensor. You would have seen this on your camera. It is measured in f-stops, for example, f2.8, f3.5, all the way up to f16 or 20 or 30s. Um, and in addition to allowing the amount of light to reach the sensor, it also directly impacts the depth of field. The wider the aperture, uh, also known as the lower f numbers, allows more light into your camera and throws the background out of focus, which allows you to achieve these kind of blurry background, dreamy backgrounds that kind of keeps the butterfly as the main subject of your picture. Now, because butterflies are really, really narrow, you don't really need a high f-stop to get everything sharp and in focus. And because of that, I tend to use aperture as a way to actually compose your image and frame the background around your butterfly to make it stand out, as opposed to aperture being a tool that directly influences the amount of light that comes into your camera sensor. So, for example, this photo here of a moonlight jewel, you don't really have to shoot this butterfly at a high f number because it's so thin. It's like shooting a piece of paper. But in this case, I wanted the leaves of the Banksia in the background to show up a little bit more. So I kind of increased the f-stop just a tiny bit above 2.8. Um, the last trio in the photograph in the exposure triangle is shutter speed. And really, shutter speed is the length of time a camera shutter remains open, which then allows how much light to reach into the aperture that touches the sensor. So it's measured in seconds or fractions, for example, 1/1000th of a second. And intuitively, the higher the shutter speed, the more likely you're able to capture something that's moving, in this case, a butterfly in flight or a butterfly that is, maybe moving because the leaf that it's sitting on is being blown around by a leaf. But I want you to think of all these individual components as a trade-off to each other. The higher the shutter speed, the less amount of light that comes in, and therefore you need to compensate by upping or lowering one of the other two pillars of this exposure triangle. So here is an example of a succeed moth that I've captured in flight. For this photo, I needed a high shutter speed because I wanted to capture the wings as it is buzzing. But then this would have limited a lot of the light coming in, so I tried to compensate for this by widening the aperture as much as possible and by bumping the ISO up. Now, because I photographed this under fairly bright ambient conditions, I was able to keep my ISO at about 1800, which was high enough to brighten the image with minimal noise exposure. So I think, yeah, the best way to think about each of these components is how they interact and work with each other, rather than each component being its own standalone thing. Um, Camera flash is really important as well. It's not part of this exposure triangle, but I find this really situationally useful to counter backlight or to bring out a natural iridescence of a butterfly. Now, a lot of butterflies have quite a lot of natural iridescence already, so I always try to use flash as a tool to bring out the inherent beauty of a butterfly or a subject you're photographing, and not as the main light source. Now, I've I've kind of skimmed through that because I really wanted to get into the meat of today's talk, which is really about how to use the behavior that a lot of butterflies exhibit in the field to help with your photography. Now, the butterflies are actually not boring. They're really quite complex little critters that do a whole bunch of different things um, at different times of the day, or unique to only a particular sex of the species, or restricted to a particular family of butterfly, for example. It would be impossible to discuss everything in this talk alone. But in the following slides, I'd like to talk about phenology, habitat, nectar and host plants, some of the behaviors, including hilltopping, puddling, the nature of a butterfly, for example, like how it camouflages and interacts with its environment, with the hopes that when you're out in the field, or if anyone you're interested in, oh, sorry, anyone that you know who's interested in butterfly photography can then take away knowing a little bit more about what to look for and when to look for. Um, and much of the enormous diversity of butterflies are recognized only in 6 families, of which 5 are very well represented in Australia. The metal marks in the Rhyodinidae, they're found only in the northern part of Australia, so they're not really something you would probably encounter in your day-to-day adventures out in the field or the bush. And while many of the behaviors that I will touch on are shared across some of these families, a lot are fairly restricted to particular families. For example, ant association is really mostly only known in lycinids and rhyodinids, so on and so forth, things like that. So you've got your camera, you've got your sunscreen in your hat, you've got Michael Braby's Butterflies of Australia book. You're all set to go hunting. and you've narrowed down the species that you're looking for, um, but you haven't found it. You spent a whole year looking, you haven't found it. Is there something you're doing wrong? Are you not looking in the right places? With any photography hobby, birds or butterflies, there's always an element of luck to it. But there are some useful things to know about that might help you increase the chances of finding the species that you're looking for. So let's start by talking about them. Phenology, so when to find them. Many butterflies are only on the wing at specific times of the day. Some species fly only during a small period of the year, which might correspond to changes in seasons. Um, the ability to find their host plants, the availability of the host plants, and when the new flush of leaves appear. Knowing the flight period for a butterfly that you're looking for will help you save a lot of time in the field. So I'm going to use some local butterflies from Canberra, for example. Um, on the top left, you have your violet coppers, I think, Paralucia crosbyi. They are some of the earliest spring butterflies to emerge in Australia. They fly from July to August as early of, and often only in high altitudes in submontane zones. In areas of the Mudgee National Park where they fly, often you still see snow on the ground in months as early as July and August when they fly. It's really quite remarkable. Cypriptides maculosus, for example, is another really early spring butterfly emerging in September and October. Their emergence is tightly linked to the flowering of Hakea, which they feed on. And outside of these months, you will probably never see these two species flying on the wing. So if your intended target is a butterfly that flies only in a short amount of time in a particular month of the year, knowing where and when is really important. And then, of course, on the contrary, you have things that are on the wing for pretty much throughout the entirety of the year. In Canberra, for example, in lower altitude zones, the imperial Jezebel, Delias harpalici flies sometimes even through the winter months. So being aware of these phenological cycles can really help you look for what you want to find. And then there are other species that are more active during certain hours of the day. Skippers, for example, come to mind. Some of the Hasora species are crepuscular and are only more active on the wing during dawn and dusk. This is not to say that they're not flying during the rest of the day. Oftentimes they'll just be hiding under a leaf or, seeking out shelter in really deeply shaded parts of the bush. But you will increase your chances looking for them in the early hours of the day or kind of closer towards sunset. Now, where and when go really well together, and they often go hand in hand because many types of butterflies are also habitat specialists. That's to say that they occur in really restricted pockets of suitable habitats scattered throughout their range. And this could be due to a variety of different factors, including the host plant availability on which they lay their eggs, environmental interactions, for example, the presence or absence of a particular ant that they need for in their life histories, microclimates, things like that. So here are some examples of habitat specialist butterflies that are found only exclusively, well, rather more commonly in mangrove habitats. And in the correct mangroves and at the right time of the year, you might find some of these to be particularly abundant. For example, in some of the backwater mangrove areas around Cairns, I found both the copper and narcissus jewels to be really particularly abundant, at times more than dozens of them just buzzing around during the day. And I feel like as someone who's been on the other side of it, when I first moved to Australia and seen pictures of these things in Michael Braby's book, all I wanted to do is to find a copper jewel or a narcissus jewel, and it took me a long time to realize that I was just not looking in the right places. Now, stalking butterflies around flowers are also a really good idea for a lot of very obvious reasons. For many species of butterflies, nectar is the primary source of energy for their day-to-day activities. Flowering trees and shrubs, in particular, are really good resources to look for. Um, Especially for species that are particularly restless or otherwise elusive. So swallowtails, for example, are normally really restless, and the perfect opportunity to see and photograph the swallowtails when they're preoccupied with feeding. The Ulysses butterfly, for example, is a species that is constantly, almost always on the wing whenever I've seen it. And even when resting, they don't typically show the brilliant blue upper sides. Um, and fortunately, for them, they are really attracted to these bright red flowers. And when they do feed on them, they provide lots of opportunities for taking photos. Same with all the other species of swallowtails. They're really just best photographed when they're feeding on flowers. So if you do find a flowering bush in a suitable habitat, it's always good to just keep an eye out. And the type of flowers as well really plays a big role. And here you can see some examples of the right type of flowers, coaxing normally shy species out of hiding, or canopy dwelling species that don't normally descend from the treetops, coming down to feed on these flowers. Lantana, bottle brushes, these are some really popular flowers that I find tend to attract species out in suitable habitat. So it always pays to look around flowers, especially if they're growing in places where you might find a species that you're looking for. And a very special form of butterfly feeding behavior, which is employed by the crows and tiger butterflies, or otherwise known as the milkweed butterflies. It's called pharmacophagy. And males of these denying butterflies are often strongly attracted to plants that contain these alkaloids, which they use to generate pheromones or to imbue into their metaphor for transfer to receptive females. I don't think this is a behavior that's very common in Australia, but throughout my travels, I've seen lots of examples of milkweed butterflies gathering in large numbers around these Asteraceae plants, scratching at the leaves and just licking up the chemical infused juices that seep out of the veins. So something to look out for when you're in the northern part of Australia, perhaps, or overseas in suitable areas. Um, Host plants, I'm sure a lot of you know, butterflies are highly specific in the plant on which they lay their eggs. And many species of butterflies will lay their eggs only on one or two types of plants or plants maybe belonging to a specific family. Um, some butterflies go a little bit further in that they display really high site fidelity to their preferred host plants. Um, and exploiting this behavior and understanding this behavior can be really rewarding, especially if you're looking for female butterflies, which sometimes could be the less common sex. Um, a particular type of butterfly from, or any, most butterflies from the Lyciniid family tend to take this a step further in that beyond just the host plant selection, they also have a close relationship with ants, which is known as myrmecophily. These caterpillars often produce sugary secretions that the ants drink or employ chemical deception in exchange for the protection from these ants. So finding the correct ant species that is associated with the correct host plant uh, is often either half the battle won or a home run. Gelminus, for example, is really, really, really good. It's a really good example of a species that is very dependent on its ant and its acacia plant. You can find a grove with hundreds of acacia, but the one that's covered in ants is usually the one that's also covered in these imperial hair streak butterflies. Here are some other examples of butterflies that are more easily encountered through searching for suitable host plants rather than the actual butterfly. It took me a long time in Sydney to find the imperial hair streak, but I got told by a friend of mine to look for it in a patch of bush where there were lots of acacia with ants growing on them. And true enough, Gelminus and the Paralucia butterfly on the top right are almost always found whenever I'm in the field associated with the acacia or Bursera host plants. So hilltopping is another mating strategy employed by basically almost all the butterfly families. This behavior is pretty much skewed towards the males. Males will defend territories at the top of very prominent vantage points, where they spend a few hours of the day chasing other males, engaging in aerial combat to intercept passing females. They do this in really basically to increase their chance of finding a suitable mate, especially if the inherent butterfly density is really low and spread across really large habitat. By congregating at these rendezvous points, males and females of the same species have higher chances of interacting with each other. And different Interestingly enough, different species have their preferred hilltopping times. Some will only visit hilltops earlier during the day. Some will visit hilltops in the middle of the day. Some, pretty much later in the afternoon. And I've seen hilltopping activities go on till 6 or 7 p.m. in the evening. In areas where there isn't a prominent landscape, I found that really tall trees with prominent canopies can also act as pseudo hilltops. Sometimes I think it's known as tree topping. And these are all really good areas to look for butterflies that are, as I've said, naturally scarce in the wild and are generally too elusive to observe otherwise. I've spent a lot of my time with friends from Sydney going to the Blue Mountains looking for hill-topping butterflies. Um, Here is an example of a pair of male Maclay swallowtails doing aerial combat. I think hilltopping actually, hilltops rather, are a great place to practice getting your in-flight photographs. Um, because they often, if you pay attention to what they're doing, they're flying in circles around a particular tree or a particular mountain ridge or a hilltop, and you can actually follow their patterns quite predictable. And so it gives you a lot of opportunities to pan in the sky and try and get photos like that. Which I find, part of the challenge of getting butterfly photography, because if you're going to wait for them to appear at a flower, you might be waiting for a long time. Whereas if you, went up to a hilltop and look for them, you probably see them pretty fairly often. Not Hill topping is not restricted to just one family, as I've said before. A lot of different butterfly families do it. Here's a Delis aganipi hill topping at Mount Ainslie parking lot, which I spent a lot of my time at as well in the Canberra region. Um, yeah, so again, a great place to practice your in-flight photos and seeing species that you would normally not encounter otherwise. I remember telling a friend of mine that despite the amount of time I've spent in the field, I've never actually seen a Delis agonipi just flying around in the bush until I went to my first hilltop a couple of years ago and I just saw half a dozen of them just chasing each other. So they must just exist in these wide swaths of habitat in really small numbers, and then just come up to the hilltop during the day to do their thing. And yeah, it's just really mind blowing. And here are a selection of species that are quite often found hilltopping in the New South Wales and Canberra region. With the exception of the moonlight jewel and the acrodipsis, these were all mostly photographed in Mount Ainslie. The two-tailed emperors, I think. I can't remember what the common names. The Polyurus sempronius, they're pretty common. They show up just a little bit before noon. The Nitrocorini flat shows up fairly early in the morning and then disappears by around lunchtime. And the moonlight jewels come at a much later time in the Blue Mountains where I've been looking for them at around 2, 3 o'clock. So different times of the day bring different species to the hilltop. And I've spent, basically all day on um, spring and summer days sitting on top of the hill getting sunburned, just waiting for different butterflies to come. But it is a pretty rewarding time to look for butterflies in these areas. Um, the next probably important behavior that is more skewed towards male butterflies is puddling. This is again a male-dominated activity that is most conspicuous in the swallowtail family, but also found pretty much in all the other butterfly families. Um, and this is when male butterflies, usually the younger males that have just emerged, where they fly around looking for seepages or puddles with organic waste or minerals and salts they come down and they drink from it. Um, and these minerals and amino acids are not usually found in flower nectar, so they have to go out and search for these alternative sources of yeah, um, um, organic compounds. So here's a big group of Graphium species puddling in Sulawesi. Again, I feel like this is not something that I see very often in Australia, but it definitely does happen. I've seen it a few times in usually the wetter parts of the Queensland tropics, but in equatorial regions, it is a very commonly encountered behavior. And there are some species that are really strongly attracted to carrion, for example, or animal carcasses and feces and other foul-smelling organic substances that you can't normally see during the regular parts of the day unless presented with an opportunity. So if you understand this behavior and exploit it using artificial baits, you can be rewarded with seeing some really pretty butterflies. This is an example of one. I photographed this in Malaysia a couple of years ago on some artificial shrimp paste and water mixed in a bottle. And like I said before, puddling is quite a ubiquitous behavior that is not restricted to one particular family. Here are some examples of nymphalids, papilionids, hesperids, and lysanids all puddling. And here's a video I took recently of a swallowtail butterfly puddling on a forest track in Malaysia. And you can see that when they do that, they can be really, really engrossed, so much so that they're completely oblivious to, uh, in this case, me trying to photograph it. I've had my phone camera basically pointed to mere millimeters away from it. So and in Australia, I've seen Ulysses butterflies puddling, not very often. I've seen some of the Graphium and Appius species do that in crystal cascades near Cairns. So it's definitely a behavior that's exhibited here. It's just I don't think it's as common as elsewhere in the world. Oh, sorry, just trying to change the slide. Yeah. Um, Now, another aspect of butterfly ecology is camouflage, and I never really appreciated how leaf-like a lot of butterflies appear to be until I saw my first ever leaf butterfly in the jungles of Malaysia and realized just how amazing this novel strategy for camouflage has independently arose multiple times within the butterfly tree of life. I might be wrong, but I feel like this is really the most conspicuous in nymphalids and lysanids. And many species are highly adapted to looking like dead leaves and twigs. And for a long time, I tried looking for a lot of these butterflies and to no avail. But then later on in my butterfly photography journey, I realized that a lot of them are actually there, but you don't see them until you flush them out of hiding. So they're really good at remaining really, really motionless. Um, in Australia, for example, a really good example is the female wonder brown, Heteronympha mirifica. I first found these with a friend of mine in a gully near Fitzroy Falls, and there were so many of them in the leaf litter, but I never knew that they were there until I did a little walk through and shuffled the leaves, and they all just erupted out of hiding. So a lot of these butterflies, you might actually have to put in a bit of effort walking off the beaten track and flush them out of hiding, and then tracking them down as they fly, seeing where they land, and then approaching them more carefully. The female Heteronympha merope, for example, melanitis, and the leaf wing. I think you guys call it the leaf wing in Australia. We call it something else um, in Singapore where I grew up. But these are all examples of butterflies that look really, really much like leaves in the wild, and finding them could be yeah, a bit of a challenge if you don't know what to look out for or where to find them. And I guess, to stretch it a little bit further, mimicry in butterflies can be seen as a form of camouflage. I find this to be most conspicuous in the swallowtails and the nymphs, and sometimes the mimicry is so amazing that it involves interfamiliar or intergeneric, and sometimes even interspecific mimicry rings. Sometimes it can even include moths. Um, and there's basically mainly two different types of mimetic circles. There are Batesian mimics, which are species that mimic unpalatable models. And then you have Mullerian mimics, which are a bunch of similar looking unpalatable species that have the same color scheme, thereby mutually reinforcing the same warning or aposematic coloration. Here are two really good examples of the palatable models mimicking their distasteful. Sorry, the palatable mimics mimicking the distasteful models. On the left, you have two species from two completely different families. And on the right, you have examples of two different species from the same family that have evolved to look the same. And when you're looking at the photos, you might think, oh, I can tell which one's which, but in flight, it's actually really remarkable. I've been tricked so many times when I'm out in the field. They don't just mimic how the unpalatable species superficially looks, they actually fly in the same way as well. A lot of these distasteful species fly in a really slow and languid fashion, and the species that are trying to copy them also do the same thing. So it's yeah, it can be quite tricky to discern them. And then here you have an example of a bunch of Mullerian mimics that have evolved similar warning color schemes. In this case, these are all species from the red body swallowtail complex that have the same warning coloration. In Australia, you only have a single species, or actually maybe two. I don't know if Criseta is part of this group, but Pachylepta polydorus, for example, is a really commonly encountered species up in far north Queensland. Um, and in the tropics, you'll have a multiple variety of different red body swallowtails from different genera. Most of these sequestered their toxins during the caterpillar stage from leaves of Aristolochia Dutchman pipe vines. So they really just fly around like they know they're poisonous and they don't want to be eaten by birds because they know they won't be. Um, and possibly the most well-known mimicry ring in Australia belongs to the Danish Psychonotus complex. I tried to do a little bit of research before this to see which particular species might be the distasteful one, but I can't actually find any evidence that Danish is the poisonous model. Maybe Michael would know something more about this, but what I can tell you is that there are a lot of species in Australia that superficially look the same. And it's really remarkable that they all come from different genera as well. Psychonotus, Gemmides, Hypochrysops, Hypolysania, Nakaduba. Um, except for the top right photo, which is courtesy of Jeff, I've never seen Hypocras Theon, but from what I know, it's part of the same complex. So it's always interesting to see these little green banded blues flying out in the tropical climates of Australia and trying to figure out which one it is. Yeah, so it's always fun. Um, oops, sorry. Oh, um, sorry about that. Oh, okay. Well, that's the last slide that I have. I might have planned this to go for a little bit shorter than I had originally planned for. So I guess there's just more times for questions. But I just want to show this photo as the last slide for my talk, which I feel is really fitting because sometimes when you're out in the field with your camera, the perfect opportunity comes and you somehow still manage to stuff up in this case. And that's okay. That's part of the butterfly photography journey. I was out in the Northern Territory looking for scarlet Jezebels, and three of them showed up lined up on this flowering gum. And I thought I had it, but I blew it, and all of them were out of focus. But I still kept the photo because, this was the first time I've ever seen scarlet Jezebels outside of Queensland. And it was a fun experience. I applied everything that I knew about the species. I went out looking for them in the right type of eucalypt woodlands. I found a flowering gum which I knew that they liked, and there they were. And in spite of that, everything still went wrong, but that's okay. The most important thing is you go out there and you look for the butterflies and you have fun and do it in a safe manner. So yeah, I like to end it here. Um, and just wanted to reiterate that, um, you know, butterfly photography really is just ultimately what makes you happy when you're out in the field. So do whatever you feel is right for you, that you don't have to buy an expensive camera the next day. Just go out with your phone, apply the things that you know, and photograph them. Yeah.
Thank you, Kai. That was amazing. That was perfect. And actually, don't worry about the timing. I think it's always better to be slightly under time rather than going over 15 minutes or something. So it's really appreciated and fantastic. So thank you very much. And I hope everyone enjoyed it. So obviously we have some time for questions, and while everyone is gathering their thoughts and getting ready to shoot off some interesting questions to Kai, I just wanted to make one point before I forget it. I actually see that we have about 40 participants at the moment, which is a great outcome. So obviously there is a need for these meetings, and I really think it is something we should continue. And I hope we get some input also from our members as to what kind of topics they would like to see and maybe some ideas what they might want to present. And I also wanted to especially welcome all the members from overseas. I'm actually quite surprised to see that many who have joined us from outside of Australia. So I already had the pleasure of talking to two of our members from Sri Lanka. So that's possibly the most exotic destination. But yeah, fantastic to see some of our European colleagues and people from New Zealand, which I think are almost Australian anyway. So, so I think now it's time for questions. So you can obviously unmute yourself and ask directly. Maybe lift your hand so that you so there is a react button somewhere that allows you to lift your hand, and then we can sort of avoid all talking over each other. Or you can also type in your question into the chat. So, and in the meantime, maybe I start because maybe people need another minute. Kaya, wonderful presentation, and I'm not a butterfly specialist, but I was really pleased to see clearwing moth in one of your pictures, which is actually the group that I'm working on. So, fantastic job. So, I just was interested more from like a professional point of view. I mean, how do you separate your interest in taxonomy and perhaps the need to collect specimens from the joy of just taking photographs? Have you mixed it, or is butterflies really something that only fills your time with creating beautiful photographs, or have you done some taxonomy and maybe phonistic collecting as well? You need to unmute yourself, or do I have to do that?
Kai, you should
Me?
be able to. Can you unmute
I
yourself,
don't
Kai?
know how. Michael, do you know how to unmute Kai?
I think he has to unmute himself.
No. Oh, this is a problem. That's probably true for the others as well. Um, Anyone, any idea?
It's working now.
Ah,
For some reason, it said the host needed to unmute me. Um, Thank you, Axel. I actually recognized you years ago. I think you're the only person that has ever identified any of my clearwing moths on iNaturalist. And
that's probably me. Yeah.
yeah, I've seen many clearwing moths in the wild, but I've never actually photographed any of them because they are very hard to photograph. I feel like they hover a lot and they don't often land. So that was an unusual encounter. So as you know, being a taxonomist, it's hard for me to not want to collect things because being a taxonomist inherently involves collecting, and I do have jars of fishes everywhere in my office. So I do collect things, but I've somehow managed to disentangle that from my butterfly passion because I feel like I want to keep it as pure as possible when it comes to just my pure unadulterated love for it. Because I feel like when I'm really bogged down with my fish research, butterfly photography is something that I can just default to and just not spend too much time trying to make it work. If I end up collecting it, then it just becomes work, and I don't want to have to do two different jobs full time with the same pressure. So instead of collecting specimens, I collect photos, and I actually have a lot of joy out of trying to find species that have never been photographed before alive. They might not be rare, they might just be, hard to find and no one's actually bothered photographing them. So part of the joy of collecting comes through collecting the photos. That being said, though, I don't have any issue with collecting. A lot of my friends are butterfly collectors, and we often go out in the field together. And after I've taken the photo, they swipe it, and everyone's happy. So.
All right. Yeah. Very good summary of it because I actually do agree. So, I mean, obviously, photography is great and in many cases sufficient to identify species, but obviously, there is a lot of need in having specimens for, taxonomy or phylogenetic analysis. So I think we all, or most of us, agree on that, I think.
I,
Anyway,
I,
yeah,
I,
go on.
sorry. So yeah, I think the other part about being so passionate about butterflies is I read a lot about them in the literature, and I can identify, I think, you know, genera that are problematic and will need more taxonomic work, but I'm more than happy to default that to other people to do. And just, if they need photos for their revisions, I'm here. But otherwise, I'm happy to leave it in the hands of other more capable people.
Great.
Yep.
David Britton has his hand up. So what's your question?
Evening, everyone. And thanks for that, Kai. Lovely, lovely photos.
Thank you.
I learned a lot, and I think it was a great excuse to look at your photos as well. I'm going to ask a pretty dry question and something I'm really bad at, which is how do you manage associating data with your photos afterwards? Do you have any good tips on how to keep track of where you took the photos and the situation and so on? I know you capture lat longs when you take a photo, but the everything else bit, I'm absolutely dreadful about it. Everything goes into a big pot, and I'm lucky if I find it again.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I try to apply as much of my data hygiene that I, applied to my academic and professional work to my photos as well. So what I've now, tried to do is at the end of every day where I'm out taking photos, I will put them straight into my hard drive instead of I used to just leave them in my memory card for until I find time, it could be months or even years down the line sometimes. But what I do now is I religiously, after every day, put all my photos in a memory card. I date them and I put them in a folder with the general area that I've been to. For example, Mount Aisley, 12th of, March 2025, whatever. And then I have a little notebook that I write down, was it raining, what the conditions were. Particularly if I find a really rare butterfly or a butterfly that hasn't been photographed before. I will, consciously put in, yes, put in the effort to, make notes of where I've seen it and what I've done. I've also started putting on my photos on iNaturalist a lot, which I never used to. So I can't speak for the backlog of photos that I photographed in the last 10 years that haven't been uploaded into iNaturalist. But moving forward, I've just done that. And for species that are not rare, which is most of them, I've basically just put in the lat longs that comes associated with the photos. And that's as much as I do, really. I don't know if I should be doing more with my pictures, but that's the extent to which I record my information.
Oh, you're doing heaps more than I do. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? So please don't be shy. And if you don't know how to lift your hand, just speak.
Can I put my hand up because I don't know how to put the thing up? I actually use Lightroom, and I wondered if you use Lightroom because I find that really helps because I can add keywords once I've loaded them in. And that might help also for Dave Britton as well.
That's really good. I don't use Lightroom. I have Lightroom, so I do my post-processing in Photoshop. I try not to touch my photos as much as possible. I really just use Photoshop for cropping, noise removal. Photoshop has really good noise removal, inbuilt noise removing software now. I use it for light balance, but I try not to touch the colors very much. So Lightroom, I know Lightroom is really good because you can categorize them in albums and put tags onto it. But I put my photos on Flickr as well. It's not as good, but I do chuck them in there sometimes with albums, with general location data. And Flickr is really good because it captures all the EXIF data that comes with the photo. So you can pull up any photo that you've shot in RAW, and it'll tell you the shutter speed, the aperture settings, the ISO settings, and the date and time. And some cameras come with an inbuilt GPS geotagger as well that actually gives you location data that comes with the photo. So I think with a lot of softwares and cameras nowadays, you really don't have to do much. It comes with a lot of the data curation already.
Yeah, I think you'll find that Lightroom does all of those things as well.
Okay.
Which I find. And the other thing I also do is if a butterfly is actually behaving itself and I've got all my shots in camera, then I whip out my phone out of my back pocket and quickly take photos as well and upload those onto iNaturalist.
Yeah.
And then that also helps with where they the geographic position of where they are.
Hello, Jessa, in the comments.
Yeah, Kai, can you see the comments? Otherwise, I can also read them out. There's a question actually from Jessa. Can you share your shrimp paste recipe?
Can I
Yeah,
share my?
you
Oh,
and
yes. So, it's actually really common in Asia, not so much here. And I know you've been to Borneo, so you might have actually even seen it already. But it comes in a brick, or sometimes you can buy it in a little jar. It's basically just dried fermented shrimp that is used for cooking. A lot of Southeast Asian curries or stir fry recipe uses dried shrimp, and it smells, like what you would imagine dried shrimp to smell like. So what I normally do is I just buy a block of it and I just dissolve it in a bottle of water. I shake it until it completely dissolves and then I pour it. Where you deploy the bait actually is really important. So it has to be in an area where it's cooked by the sun, so it evaporates and then it disperses throughout the forest. I usually put it in an area that has a long and open flight path. So in a jungle track or beside a river is usually the best because the water from the river is keeping the shrimp paste perpetually damp, so you don't have to keep topping up with water. And then just waiting. It works amazingly well. I've tried shrimp paste in Australia and I haven't really had a lot of luck. So I think it really is quite for some reason, just certain areas just don't really have butterflies that just respond to this bait as well as other places. And it works with a lot of things too. I've seen people using urine in the Amazon, which I've tried in Malaysia, rotting shrimp, fish. I tend to just stick to shrimp paste because it keeps the photos really nice and clean because you can't really see it when it's in the ground. Whereas a big rotting prawn is not pleasing to look at in the photo. So,
Mm.
yeah.
And fermenting fruit, I found also in the Amazon is a real good one.
Yeah, different butterflies will respond to different fruit, different bait. So fermenting fruit tends to attract a lot of the more cryptic, shy jungle-dwelling species. The shrimp paste will attract things like your swallowtails and your lysinids, and different sexes are also attracted to different things. The females will go to fruit more, and the males tend to go to the shrimp paste. But it's always fun because you put the bait and then you just wait and see what comes. And every day is a different set of species.
Can I maybe catching up on that? So has anyone properly looked at the question why shrimp paste, for example, works so well in Southeast Asia but doesn't seem to be working in Australia? Is there a difference in the, I don't know, soil composition that Australian butterflies don't rely on the shrimp paste, I don't know, amino acids or minerals, or has anyone looked at that? Because I noticed it myself, certain baits that work really, really well in Europe or in Asia just don't do anything in Australia and the other way around. Someone must have looked at that. Michael, do you know that?
No.
John?
Maybe not so easy. Maybe that's a PhD project for
Maybe.
someone or honors project. Are there any more questions from the audience?
We have a question from Martin Weimers from Germany.
I was just a follow-up on the previous one because I think it's interesting. I noticed that in some areas you also don't find mud puddling. For example, I noticed in some areas in Costa Rica, I was there quite often, and at similar places they don't do that. And some colleagues said maybe it's because of exactly of the ground that they don't maybe only do that when there is not enough minerals or so. But I'm not really sure if it's been investigated well. There are so many things we still I don't really have good research on. So I'm not really aware of any proper research.
Yeah. I think there's also an element to, and this is again all anecdotal because, I'm not a researcher and I haven't done the actual science, and I don't think there's a lot of mud puddling and the ecology and behavior aspect of it that's not really well known. But I have noticed that it is a social activity. Oftentimes, the puddle grows exponentially bigger and quicker the more butterflies come to it. And actually, the butterfly collectors in Indonesia have exploited this. So what they do is they have dead butterflies that they scatter on the riverbank, and the dead butterflies on the ground attract butterflies that are flying to come down and puddle. And the bigger the puddle grows, the more butterflies join, and then it becomes a social thing. So I think in some areas, butterfly density is just too low that you don't really get that kind of catalytic growth happening. Because in Singapore, for example, like if I put shrimp paste in Singapore, I get like one or two little Eurema grass yellow things that come. But if I do the same thing in Malaysia, which is just across the causeway, you get hundreds of butterflies. So I think it's just possibly in some areas there's just not enough butterflies that get drawn to the immediate surrounding. So I think location is probably just as important as what you're using to attract them. But again, it's all anecdotal. It could be wrong. I could just be hallucinating and making things up. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that no one's actually looked at it.
Thanks. So every research starts from some anecdotal evidence, I
Yeah,
think. So
true.
That's right.
And then you need to maybe check on that, maybe in more detail. So thanks. Yeah, that's great.
So Axel, the little clearwing moth was actually photographed on shrimp paste, and I've only ever seen
Yep.
them on shrimp paste. So yeah,
Yeah, I'm aware of that. That's the reason why I tried it myself.
awesome.
Okay, we're getting close to finish line, but there's one more question from Peter, has his hand up. You need to unmute yourself, please.
Yep. Hey, thanks, Kai. I've just got a question. Do you shoot your photos? I don't know if you cover this in RAW or JPEGs, because I have been using camera RAW, and then you've sort of got to do a whole lot of post-processing to get the right color.
Yes, so I still shoot in RAW, but with a lot of the more advanced versions of Lightroom and Photoshop, you can actually shoot in JPEG, and you can still edit the photos with like the Photoshop RAW processing tools, which I think is really good because, well, first and foremost, RAW files are enormous, so they take up a lot of space. So I tend to I still shoot in RAW most of the time, but if I'm going on a really long trip, for example, where I know I'll be out in the field for 10 days, I'm just going to be photographing hundreds of butterflies, I tend to shoot in JPEG more than RAW, and really just use RAW for things that are, if I see a butterfly that I know is going to be important, then I switch to RAW. But to put it simply, I use both. But yes,
Okay,
yeah, I don't know if those. I like the butterfly collection behind with the
yeah.
see if you can identify them. Yeah.
Yeah, they're from Thailand, I think.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, so we have reached the 1 hour mark, and probably should call it a day very soon. So are there any more burning questions? Maybe we can have one more if there's anything urgent.
I have
Michael.
one very simple question, Kai, and that is, can you explain the difference between JPEG and TIFF files? Some publishers like your photos submitted as JPEGs, and others prefer TIFF, and I never quite know which one to use.
Okay,
TIFF files tend to be larger.
Yeah, so I don't know the actual definition of the difference, but I know one thing that TIFF files can do that JPEG doesn't is that it doesn't compress the image. So if you're in Photoshop, for example, and you've added lots of different layers to the photos and you've edited it with different layers, if you save it as a JPEG, it compresses everything. So when you open in Photoshop, it's just a single static image. Whereas if you open a TIFF file, you have access to the different layers still. So again, I don't think this is the true definition of a TIFF and JPEG file, but I think the compression has something to do with it. So don't know.
Thank you.
All right. Good. I think that was a great success. I really would like to thank Kai for his effort and for his wonderful presentation. It was fantastic images and a great discussion. I think if we can continue this presentation series like that, we will be in a very good position. Michael, maybe you can mention when we have our next presentation, so that everyone has it up their sleeve. Do you remember that by any chance? I think in about 6 months' time, or maybe earlier even.
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that, Axel.
Okay, we can send.
No, it's actually in May. It's in 2 months' time, but I've just forgotten
right.
the date. I think it's the 20. It's the last week of May. It might be the 27th or something. So we'll actually be having our AGM, our annual general meeting, and Chris Anderson will be giving a talk after the AGM on insect conservation. But I'll send an email out just to remind everybody well before that.
Fantastic. Yeah, and as I said earlier, so there will definitely be the plan to have maybe 3 to 4 of these presentations every year. And if any one of you or of the other members feel strongly about certain topics or wish to present some of their data, please get in touch, and we can see what is suitable and what we can arrange time-wise. Otherwise, I thank everyone for joining us. Please spread the word. Tell everyone of your moth and butterfly friends what a wonderful society this is and what a great meeting and presentation night this was. So, I thank everyone for joining, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Also, I've recorded the meeting, so I will try and get this uploaded to our website over the next few months. And Kai is actually our website master. So, Kai, you may get the onerous task of uploading
Putting my own talk on the website? Okay. I'll make sure to delay it as much as I can.
Okay,
All right.
fantastic.
Thanks so much, guys.